They thought they could humiliate me and I'd just smile and take it. When my own family seated me in the kitchen with the catering staff at my brother's wedding, treating me like hired help instead of the woman who built their fortune, I knew exactly how to strike back. What they didn't realize was that I held the one card that could destroy everything they'd plotted to steal from me. And when I finally played it, they never saw it coming. My name is Caroline Hayes, and for 34 years, I've been the invisible daughter in a family that only sees golden boys. While my brother Ethan spent his 20s partying through college and his 30s coasting on charm, I was the one burning the midnight oil in our family's construction company. Hayes Development Group didn't become the premier building contractor in the Midwest because of Ethan's winning smile or our father's old-school handshake deals. It succeeded because I rebuilt it from the ground up. One spreadsheet, one contract negotiation, one strategic partnership at a time. But try explaining that to Richard and Elaine Hayes, my parents, who still introduce me at company events as our Caroline. She handles the books, as if I'm some glorified accountant instead of the CFO who pulled this company out of near bankruptcy 5 years ago when Dad's heart attack forced him into semi-retirement. Ethan, meanwhile, gets introduced as our son, the future of Hayes Development. Never mind that he can barely read a profit and loss statement, let alone draft the complex development proposals that keep our competitors awake at night. His greatest business achievement to date was convincing Lauren Whitford to marry him, and even that was more about her family's money than his charm. Lauren Whitford. Just thinking her name makes my jaw clench. She's everything my parents think I should be: blonde, bubbly, and perpetually available for charity galas and society luncheons. More importantly, she's the daughter of Marcus Whitford, who owns Whitford Realty, the most prestigious real estate development firm in 3 states. When Ethan announced their engagement 18 months ago, I watched my parents' eyes light up like they'd won the lottery. "This is it," Dad told me over dinner that night, his voice thick with excitement. "This marriage will cement our position in the market. The Whitfords have connections we've only dreamed of." What he didn't say, but what hung in the air like smoke, was that Ethan had finally done something right, something that would secure the family legacy in ways my years of financial wizardry apparently couldn't. From that moment, everything became about the alliance. Business meetings turned into wedding planning sessions. Our quarterly reviews started including discussions about which Hayes development projects would align well with Whitford's vision. I watched my life's work slowly transform into a dowry for my brother's marriage. The worst part, Ethan ate up every second of the attention. Suddenly, he was attending board meetings, weighing in on decisions he didn't understand, and presenting my strategies as our collaborative vision for the future. My parents nodded along, proud of their son's newfound business acumen, while I sat in the corner taking notes like a secretary. Lauren, for her part, played the role of supportive fiancé perfectly. She'd arrive at our offices in designer suits, bringing coffee for her future business partners, and speaking in vague terms about synergistic opportunities between our families. But I caught the way she looked at me when she thought no one was watching, like I was a piece of outdated furniture that needed to be moved to make room for the new decor. The engagement party was my first real taste of what was coming. Held at the Whitford estate, a sprawling mansion that screamed old money, it felt more like a corporate merger announcement than a celebration of love. I spent the evening watching Ethan and Lauren pose for photos while business associates whispered about the strategic brilliance of the match. When someone asked about my role in the company's future, Lauren answered before I could speak. "Oh, Caroline's been such a help with the transition planning," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're so grateful for all her administrative support." Administrative support? 20 years of building this company, and I'd been reduced to administrative support. But that was just the beginning. As the wedding date approached, my marginalization became systematic. Important clients started asking for Ethan instead of me. Vendors began copying him on emails that had previously come directly to my desk. Even our longest-standing business partners started treating me like Ethan's assistant rather than the person who'd negotiated their contracts. The message was clear. Caroline Hayes was being phased out of her own family's business, one wedding invitation at a time. And everyone was too polite or too excited about the Whitford connection to acknowledge what was happening. I should have seen the writing on the wall sooner. I should have realized that in my family's eyes. I'd never be anything more than the competent daughter who kept things running while they waited for the golden boy to find his destiny. But I was too busy actually running the company to notice I was being written out of its future. That blindness would cost me everything, or so they thought. The exclusion didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, methodical erasure that began with small slights and escalated into outright dismissal. It started at the bridal shower, held at the country club where the Whitford family had been members for 3 generations. I arrived in my best business suit, the same Armani I'd worn to close our biggest deal last year, only to realize every other woman was dressed in pastels and pearls. Lauren's mother, Patricia Whitford, kissed my cheeks and introduced me to her friends as Ethan's older sister, the one who does bookkeeping for the family business. Bookkeeping, 20 years of strategic planning, contract negotiations, and financial restructuring reduced to bookkeeping. How lovely that you help out with the family accounts, cooed one of Patricia's tennis partners. It must be nice to have something to keep you busy. Keep me busy, as if Hayes Development Group was a hobby I'd picked up to pass the time between manicures. The rehearsal dinner was worse, held at an exclusive restaurant downtown. It was supposed to be an intimate gathering of close family and friends, but somehow, the guest list had swelled to include every major player in the city's real estate and construction industries. I found myself seated at the far end of the table, wedged between Ethan's college roommate and Lauren's teenage cousin, while the adults discussed business at the other end. I watched my father lean in close to Marcus Whitford, their heads bent over what looked like architectural plans. Mom hung on Patricia's every word as she described their family's investment philosophy. And there was Ethan, basking in the attention like he'd personally invented the concept of strategic partnerships. Oh, Caroline. Lauren's voice cut through the din, saccharine sweet. We were just talking about the company reorganization. Dad thinks it would be wonderful if you could help train our financial team on Hayes Development's processes. You know, share all that institutional knowledge before the transition. Before the transition? The words hit me like a physical blow. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, alarm bells were screaming. What transition? What exactly had they been planning while I'd been excluded from the conversation? After dinner, I cornered Ethan in the parking lot. What did Lauren mean about a transition? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. At least. Look, Caroline, it's not what you think. The Whitfords have some ideas about streamlining operations. That's all. Making things more efficient. Efficient how? Well, he shuffled his feet like a schoolboy caught cheating. They think maybe it's time to bring in some outside expertise. Fresh perspectives. Outside expertise. Fresh perspectives. Corporate speak for, we're replacing you. Ethan, I built the financial systems that saved this company. I negotiated the contracts that kept us afloat when Dad was in the hospital. I know. He held up his hands defensively, and everyone appreciates that. But times change, Caroline. The Whitfords operate on a different level. We need to adapt if we want to grow. Adapt, as if my methods were somehow outdated instead of proven, as if the success I'd built wasn't good enough for their grand vision. The bachelor party was the final straw. Not that I was invited, of course, but I heard about it secondhand when Ethan came into the office the next Monday, hungover and grinning. Apparently, Marcus Whitford had treated the entire wedding party to a weekend in Vegas, complete with private jets and high-roller suites. During the festivities, he'd given a toast about the future of family business and presented Ethan with a Rolex engraved with the Hayes Development Group logo. A Rolex, with our company logo, like Ethan was already the heir apparent. Pretty generous of your future father-in-law, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Ethan's grin widened. Marcus says he believes in investing in the next generation of leadership. He thinks fresh blood is exactly what Hayes' development needs to reach the next level. Fresh blood. There it was again, the not-so-subtle implication that my blood was somehow stale, that the woman who'd spent her entire adult life building this company was now an obstacle to its growth. But the real confirmation came 3 days before the wedding, when I accidentally walked in on a phone conversation between Ethan and Marcus Whitford. I'd stopped by Ethan's office to drop off the final vendor payments for the reception, and found the door slightly ajar. Or complete restructuring within 6 months. Marcus was saying, "My team has identified several areas where Hayes could benefit from Whitford's operational expertise." "What about Caroline?" Ethan asked. "She's not going to just step aside quietly." Marcus chuckled, a sound like ice clinking in an expensive glass. "Your sister is obviously competent, but she's small-time thinking. Family businesses often struggle with this kind of transition. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. I suppose she could stay on in some capacity, maybe as a consultant or something." "Perhaps, though I'd recommend a clean break. Fresh start, new vision. The market respects bold moves, not sentimental attachments." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. A clean break, new vision. They weren't just planning to sideline me, they were planning to eliminate me entirely. That night, I sat in my apartment with a bottle of wine and my laptop, pulling up every contract, every financial record, every piece of documentation that proved what I'd built. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been focused on growing the company, they'd been plotting to steal it from under my nose. The worst part was how smoothly they'd managed it all. No dramatic confrontations, no hostile takeover, just a series of small exclusions and subtle repositioning that would culminate in my voluntary departure after the wedding. Who could argue with love? Who could stand in the way of family unity and business growth? They thought they had me cornered. They thought I'd go quietly, take whatever consulting fee they offered, and fade into the background while they built their empire on the foundation I'd laid. They thought wrong. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect October morning that wedding planners dream about. The Whitford estate looked like something out of a fairy tale, with white roses draped over every surface and enough crystal chandeliers to light up half the city. I should have been happy for my brother. Instead, I felt like I was attending my own funeral. I'd spent the morning helping with last-minute details because apparently, even on Ethan's wedding day, I was still the family problem solver. Patricia Whitford had cornered me at 7:30 a.m. with a clipboard full of tasks: coordinate with the caterers, make sure the gift table was properly arranged, handle any vendor issues that might arise, not requests assignments, as if I were hired help instead of the sister of the groom. "Caroline, dear," she'd said, her smile sharp as a blade. "You're so wonderfully organized. I just know you'll make sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes." Behind the scenes, where I belonged, apparently. I'd thrown myself into the work, partly to stay busy and partly because old habits die hard. By noon, I'd resolved a crisis with the floral arrangements, prevented a catastrophe with the sound system, and personally ensured that the champagne service would start precisely at cocktail hour. It felt good to be useful, even if no one would remember my contributions once the party started. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I'll give them that. Lauren looked stunning in a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, and Ethan actually seemed nervous for once in his privileged life. Dad cried during the vows, real tears, not the performative kind he used at board meetings. For a moment, watching them exchange rings under an arch of white peonies, I almost forgot about the betrayal simmering beneath the surface. Almost. The trouble started during cocktail hour. I'd gone back to my hotel room to change into my reception dress, a midnight blue number that had cost me 2 weeks' salary but made me feel like I could conquer the world. When I returned to the estate, guests were already mingling on the terrace, champagne glasses sparkling in the afternoon sun. I was looking for my table assignment when Lauren's maid of honor, a sharp-faced woman named Stephanie, intercepted me with a nervous smile. "Caroline, there you are. So, there's been a tiny change with the seating arrangements. She clutched her champagne glass like a shield. We had some last-minute additions to the guest list, and, well, space became an issue. My stomach dropped. What kind of change? Nothing major, you've just been moved to accommodate some of Marcus's business associates. Important clients, you understand. They needed to be seated with the family. Important clients, more important than the sister of the groom, apparently. Where exactly have I been moved to? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Stephanie's smile faltered. Well, there's a lovely little table in the kitchen area. You'll be with some of the vendor coordinators and the photographer's assistant. Very cozy. The kitchen area. They had moved me to the kitchen area. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The humiliation was so complete, so deliberate, that it took my breath away. They hadn't just excluded me from the family table, they'd seated me with the hired help. At my own brother's wedding. I see, I managed, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. And whose decision was this? Stephanie glanced around nervously, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. Well, Lauren and her mother felt it would be best for the family dynamics. You know, keeping things harmonious for the photos and all. Family dynamics, harmonious. The euphemisms were almost worse than the insult itself. I found the table tucked away in a service corridor between the kitchen and the main reception hall. A folding table with a paper tablecloth, flanked by mismatched chairs and set with the backup dinnerware. My name card, hastily printed on different paper than the rest, sat next to placeholders for catering supervisor and photography assistant. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd tattooed it on my forehead. You are not family. You are staff. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring at that pathetic excuse for a table setting. Around me, the reception was in full swing. I could hear laughter and conversation from the main hall, the clink of real crystal glasses and the gentle scrape of actual silverware against china plates, the sound of my family celebrating without me. Excuse me, are you Caroline? A young woman in a black polo shirt appeared at my elbow, holding a camera bag. I'm Jessica, the photographer's assistant. Looks like we're table mates. She seemed nice enough, enthusiastic and professional, clearly good at her job. Under normal circumstances, I might have enjoyed her company, but these weren't normal circumstances. These were the circumstances where my own family had relegated me to the kids' table, except worse, because even the kids got to eat in the main dining room. I excused myself and went looking for Ethan. I found him on the dance floor, twirling Lauren in her elaborate dress while photographers captured every angle. They looked happy. They looked perfect. They looked like the golden couple everyone expected them to be. When the song ended, I approached him. Ethan, we need to talk. He was flushed with champagne and euphoria, his bow tie slightly crooked. Caroline, isn't this incredible? Look at this place. Look at these people. This is what success looks like. They seated me in the kitchen. His smile faltered slightly. What? My table, it's in the service corridor, with the catering staff. Ethan glanced around, suddenly uncomfortable. I'm sure it's just a mistake. Space issues. You know these venues can be tricky. It's not a mistake. Ethan, your wife and her mother made a deliberate choice to humiliate me at your wedding. Come on, don't be dramatic. It's just one evening. Can't you just go with it? For me. Just go with it. For him. The brother who'd spent his entire life coasting on my work, asking me to smile and accept public humiliation so his perfect day wouldn't be marred by inconvenient family drama. Just one evening, I repeated slowly. Exactly. Look, after the honeymoon, we'll sit down and figure everything out. The business stuff, the family stuff, all of it. But tonight is about celebration. Tonight was about celebration. Tomorrow, apparently, was about my elimination. I looked at my brother, really looked at him and saw a stranger. The boy I'd protected from Dad's disappointment, the young man I'd covered for when his poor decisions threatened the company, the golden child who'd taken credit for my achievements without a second thought. He was asking me to swallow one more insult, to disappear quietly into the background so his fairy tale wedding could proceed without complications. "You're right," I said finally. "Tonight is about celebration." His relief was palpable. "I knew you'd understand. You always do." I watched him return to his bride, watched them pose for more photos with their perfect smiles and their perfect future. Then I turned and walked away from the reception, away from the laughter and the music and the sound of my family toasting their bright tomorrow. They wanted me to disappear. Fine. I was disappearing, but not in the way they expected. Not quietly, not gracefully, and definitely not forever. I had work to do. I spent the Monday after the wedding in my office, doors locked, phone off, diving deep into the financial records I knew better than my own heartbeat. What I found made my blood run cold. The transfers had been subtle, small amounts moved between accounts over the past 6 months, disguised as routine operational expenses. 100,000 here for consulting fees, 200,000 there for market research, another $500,000 categorized as strategic development costs. Individually, they looked like legitimate business expenses. Together, they painted a picture of systematic embezzlement. Every single transfer had Ethan's signature. Every single payment went to shell companies that, after an hour of digging through incorporation records, traced back to Whitford Realty subsidiaries. They'd been bleeding Hayes Development Group dry while I'd been distracted by wedding planning and family obligations. $3.7 million, moved in careful increments to avoid triggering the audit protocols I'd established years ago. My own security measures, designed to protect the company, had been circumvented by someone who knew exactly how they worked. Someone who'd had access to my systems, my procedures, my trust. My hands shook as I printed out the evidence: transaction records, bank statements, incorporation documents, a paper trail that led directly to my brother's door. But the real gut punch came when I found the email thread buried in Ethan's supposedly private account, the one he'd asked me to set up for him because he wasn't good with technology. The subject line read, Phase 1 complete. Marcus Whitford to Ethan, dated 3 weeks ago. The capital transfers are proceeding on schedule. My financial team confirms receipt of the final installment. Phase 2 can commence immediately after the wedding as discussed. Ethan's response: Caroline's been asking questions about the Q3 numbers. Should I be worried? Marcus: Your sister is obviously intelligent, but she thinks like an employee, not an owner. By the time she understands what's happening, the transition will be complete. Trust the process. Ethan: And you're sure she'll accept the consulting position? I don't want any family drama. Marcus: She'll accept what she's offered. People like Caroline prefer stability over uncertainty. A generous severance package and part-time consulting role will seem quite reasonable after the shock wears off. People like Caroline, as if I were some predictable, manageable commodity instead of the woman who'd built everything they were planning to steal. But the worst email was the last one, sent the morning of the wedding. Marcus: Final question. Are you certain your father will support the restructuring? His health concerns make him unpredictable. Ethan: Dad's scared. The heart attack shook him more than he admits. He'll go along with anything that guarantees Caroline's future employment and secures the family legacy. He doesn't need to know the consulting position is temporary. Temporary. They weren't even planning to keep me on as a figurehead. I was meant to train their people, transfer my institutional knowledge, and then be quietly pushed out within a year. I sat back in my chair, staring at the evidence spread across my desk. 20 years of my life, reduced to a transition plan and a temporary consulting agreement. 20 years of 60-hour weeks, missed vacations, sacrificed relationships, all so my brother could hand my life's work to his new in-laws like a wedding gift. The intercom buzzed. Caroline. My assistant's voice sounded nervous. Your father's here to see you. Perfect timing. I quickly swept the papers into a folder and unlocked my door. Dad looked older than his 68 years as he shuffled into my office, his face gray with exhaustion. The wedding had taken more out of him than he'd admitted, and I could see the toll it had taken in the way he moved, careful and deliberate, like a man afraid his body might betray him again. "We need to talk," he said without preamble, settling heavily into the chair across from my desk. About what I asked, though I already knew. About the future. About the company. About— He gestured vaguely, as if the words were too heavy to lift. About changes that need to be made. What kind of changes? Dad avoided my eyes. The Whitfords have made some compelling arguments about efficiency and growth potential. They have resources we don't. Connections that could take Hayes' development to the next level. And in exchange, we modernize our operations, bring in fresh perspectives, create opportunities for the next generation. The next generation? He meant Ethan, of course. Never mind that I was only 5 years older than my brother. Never mind that I'd been carrying this company since Dad's heart attack. The next generation had a penis and a marriage certificate, which apparently trumped experience and competence. What about my role in all this? I asked. Dad's shoulders sagged. Caroline, you've done incredible work here. No one disputes that, but you're 34 years old, and you've never had a life outside this office. Maybe it's time to think about what you want for yourself. What I wanted for myself, as if my wants had ever mattered to anyone in this family. The Whitfords have offered you a very generous consulting position, he continued. Good money, flexible schedule, opportunity to mentor their financial team. You could travel, date, maybe start a family of your own. Isn't that worth considering? He was selling it like liberation instead of exile, like they were doing me a favor by stealing my company and offering me scraps in return. And if I don't want the consulting position— Dad's face crumpled. Caroline, please. I'm tired. I'm sick. I just want to know that everyone I love is taken care of before— He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Before he died? That was the unspoken threat. His health was failing, and he wanted family peace before the end. How could I be selfish enough to stand in the way of his final wish? Except, it wasn't really his wish, was it? It was Marcus Whitford's plan, wrapped in emotional manipulation and delivered by a sick old man who'd been convinced he was protecting his daughter's future. I need some time to think about it, I said finally. Relief flooded his features. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Caroline— He reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. I need you to know that everything I've done because I love you, both of you. After he left, I sat alone in my office as the afternoon shadows lengthened across my desk. The folder of evidence seemed to pulse with accusation, each document a testament to how thoroughly I'd been outmaneuvered. But as I stared at those papers, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and burning, but underneath it was something harder, something sharper. They thought they knew Caroline Hayes. They thought I was predictable, manageable, someone who would accept their generous severance package and fade quietly into the background. They'd built their entire strategy around the assumption that I would choose security over justice, family harmony over personal vindication. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I opened my laptop and began pulling up every contract, every agreement, every piece of legal documentation that governed Hayes Development Group's business relationships. Somewhere in that digital maze was my weapon. I just had to find it. And when I did, the people who thought they could steal my life were going to discover that Caroline Hayes had never been manageable. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to prove it. I found my weapon buried in Section 12 of the exclusive partnership agreement I'd negotiated with Whitford Realty 8 months earlier. It was past 11 p.m. when I located it, my eyes burning from hours of scanning legal documents on my computer screen. I'd been methodically reviewing every contract Hayes Development had signed in the past 2 years, looking for leverage, for loopholes, for anything that could give me power in this impossible situation. And there it was, hidden in the subsection on corporate restructuring. In the event of merger, acquisition, or significant organizational restructuring of either party, the Chief Financial Officer of Hayes Development Group reserves the right to terminate this agreement with 30 days written notice, provided such action is deemed necessary to protect the financial integrity of Hayes Development Group. My hands trembled as I read the clause again and again. I remembered negotiating this specific language with Marcus Whitford's lawyers, remembered their resistance to giving any single executive that much power. But I'd insisted, arguing that financial oversight required decisive authority in crisis situations. At the time, it had seemed like standard corporate protection. Now, it was my nuclear option. The exclusive partnership agreement was worth $47 million in committed projects over the next 3 years. More importantly, it was the cornerstone of Whitford Realty's expansion into the Midwest market. Without Hayes Development as their local partner, they had no established contractors, no regulatory relationships, no political connections in our territory. They'd spent the better part of 2 years building their strategy around our partnership. If I terminated the agreement, their entire regional expansion would collapse overnight. But would I actually do it? Could I destroy a deal worth nearly $50 million just to spite the people who'd betrayed me? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my darkened office. Outside, the city hummed with late-night energy people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, building something meaningful. For 20 years, this office had been my entire world. This company had been my identity, my purpose, my greatest achievement. They wanted to take that away from me. They wanted to reduce me to a footnote in their success story. The hell with that. I spent the next 3 days building my case. Not just the emotional case for revenge, but the practical case for survival. If I was going to destroy the Whitford partnership, I needed alternatives in place. Hayes Development couldn't afford to lose $47 million in revenue without replacement projects. That's when I remembered David Brennan. David ran Brennan Construction Group, Whitford's biggest regional competitor. We'd worked with his company years ago, before the exclusive partnership locked us into the Whitford arrangement. David had always been straightforward to deal with no corporate politics, no family dynasties, just solid business relationships built on mutual respect. I called him Tuesday afternoon, using my personal cell phone to avoid any digital trail through the company systems. "Caroline Hayes?" David's voice warmed when he answered. "Haven't heard from you in ages. How's the family empire?" "Complicated," I said. "David, I have a hypothetical question for you. If Hayes Development were to become available for new partnerships, would Brennan Construction be interested in discussing opportunities?" There was a pause. "That's a hell of a hypothetical. I thought you were locked into an exclusive deal with Whitford." "Contracts can be terminated under the right circumstances." "Well, hypothetically speaking, we'd be very interested. Whitford's been undercutting our bids across 3 states using your company's local advantages. If that partnership dissolved, it would level the playing field considerably." And if I said this wasn't entirely hypothetical? Another pause. Longer this time. "Then I'd say we should have lunch soon. Very soon." By Thursday, I had preliminary agreements in place with 3 of Whitford's competitors, including Brennan. Nothing signed, nothing committed, but enough interest to ensure Hayes Development wouldn't go under when I pulled the trigger. The total value of potential partnerships exceeded $60 million, more than enough to replace the Whitford deal. But I needed more than just replacement contracts. I needed allies within Hayes Development, people who would support my decision when the inevitable boardroom battle erupted. I started with Janet Morrison, our head of project management. Janet had been with the company for 15 years, and she'd grown increasingly frustrated with Ethan's interference in operational decisions. Over coffee Friday morning, I carefully probed her feelings about the family dynamics. "Honestly, Caroline, it's been painful to watch," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "You built this company's reputation on quality and reliability. Now we've got Ethan promising things we can't deliver and making commitments he doesn't understand. The field crews are starting to lose respect for management. And if changes were made, if the operational structure shifted back toward proven leadership, Janet's eyes sharpened. I'd support that 100%. So would most of the senior staff, if I'm reading the room correctly. Next was Robert Kim, our chief counsel. Robert was technically a family friend. He'd known my father for decades, but he was also a pragmatist who valued legal precision over emotional loyalty. "Robert," I said during our regular Friday legal review, "help me understand something. If a CFO exercises a contract termination clause for legitimate business reasons, where does that put the company legally?" "Depends on the specific language and circumstances. But generally speaking, if the CFO has explicit authority and acts within their designated powers, the decision stands unless it can be proven to be in bad faith or deliberately harmful to the company. And if the decision could be argued to actually benefit the company's long-term interests." Robert studied me carefully. "Then it would be legally bulletproof. Caroline, is there something you need to tell me?" "Not yet, but when I do, I'll need you to be ready with answers." By Friday evening, I had everything in place: alternative partnerships worth more than the Whitford deal, internal support from key personnel, legal backing for my authority to act. The only thing missing was the courage to actually pull the trigger. I sat in my apartment that night, drinking wine and staring at the termination letter I'd drafted. 30 days' notice, as required by the contract. Professional language citing fundamental changes in corporate structure that compromise Hayes Development's operational independence. Nothing emotional, nothing personal, just cold business logic. If I sent this letter, there would be no going back. The Whitfords would be furious. Ethan would be devastated. My father would probably have another heart attack from the stress. My family would never forgive me. But they'd already made their choice. Hadn't they? They'd already decided I was expendable. They'd already planned my exile from the company I'd built. The only question was whether I'd go quietly or take a few of them down with me. I opened my laptop and attached the termination letter to a new email. The recipient field stared back at me, blank and full of possibility. Marcus Whitford's email address. The man who'd called me small-time thinking. The man who'd planned to discard me like obsolete office equipment. I typed his address slowly, double-checking each letter. Then I paused, my finger hovering over the send button. Once I sent this, everything would change. There would be consequences, battles, probably lawyers. My comfortable life would explode into chaos and uncertainty. But at least it would be my chaos, my choice, my war. I hit send. The email hit Marcus Whitford's inbox at 11:47 p.m. on Friday night. I know because I'd programmed a read receipt and spent the weekend checking my phone obsessively, waiting for the explosion. It came Monday morning at 8:15 a.m., in the form of my office phone ringing with the fury of a fire alarm. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus's voice could have cut glass. No pleasantries, no corporate diplomacy. Just raw, undiluted rage. "Good morning. Marcus, I assume you received my termination notice." "This is insane. You can't just blow up a $50 million partnership because your feelings got hurt at a wedding." "I'm not blowing up anything. I'm exercising my contractual authority as CFO to protect Hayes Development's financial integrity. Protect it from what the most lucrative deal in your company's history." I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head all weekend, but hearing his fury was still satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. From an organizational restructuring that compromises our operational independence, it's all spelled out in the termination letter. "Don't play word games with me, Caroline. We both know what this is really about. Do we please enlighten me?" There was a pause, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice was lower, more controlled, more dangerous. "You're upset about the seating arrangement. I get it. Patricia can be particular about social dynamics. But destroying a business relationship over a perceived slight, that's not professional behavior." Perceived slight, as if being relegated to the kitchen at my own brother's wedding was some minor social faux pas instead of deliberate humiliation. "The 30-day notice period gives us time to work this out," he continued. "What do you want? A formal apology, a revised role in the partnership, Name your price. My price. He thought this was a negotiation, a temporary tantrum that could be soothed with the right combination of money and ego stroking. I want the $3.7 million your company stole from Hayes Development returned to our accounts by end of business today. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. I have no idea what you're talking about. The shell companies, the consulting fees, the strategic development costs that happened to match exactly the amounts you needed for your regional expansion. I have documentation, Marcus, bank records, incorporation papers, email trails, all of it. Another pause. You're playing a very dangerous game. Caroline? No, I'm playing the only game left available to me. You and my brother spent 6 months systematically looting this company while planning to push me out. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Those were legitimate business expenses. Bullshit. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't regret it. I know every dollar that moves through this company. I built the systems you used to rob us blind. Fine. His mask of civility finally slipped completely. Let's say, hypothetically, that some advance payments were made for future services. That's standard business practice, and if you're suggesting some kind of impropriety, I'd be very careful about making accusations you can't prove in court. Court, I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Marcus, I don't need court. I have something much better. Which is, I have the authority to terminate our partnership agreement. Today, right now, and when I do, your entire Midwest expansion crumbles. $47 million in committed projects, gone. 2 years of strategic planning, worthless. Your board of directors will have some very interesting questions about how you managed to lose the most important partnership in company history. The silence this time was different, calculating. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he assessed his options. Ethan will never support this decision. Ethan doesn't have a choice. The termination clause gives sole authority to the CFO. That's me, in case you've forgotten. Your father is a sick old man who trusted you to look after his family's interests. How do you think he'll react when he learns you've been stealing from him? You're destroying your own family. No, Marcus. I'm saving what's left of it. The call ended without another word. I sat back in my chair, adrenaline coursing through my veins like electricity. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the hard part. I spent the next 2 hours making calls. First to Robert Kim, asking him to prepare immediate documentation for the partnership termination. Then to Janet Morrison, requesting an emergency meeting with senior staff to discuss strategic restructuring. Finally, to David Brennan, telling him our hypothetical conversation was about to become very real. By noon, my allies were in place. Robert had the legal framework ready. Janet had the operational team briefed on potential changes. David had preliminary contracts drafted for immediate signature. All that remained was informing my family. I called Dad first. We need to meet, today. It's urgent. Caroline, is everything all right? You sound strange. Everything's about to be fine, but I need you and Ethan in my office by 2 o'clock. Ethan's on his honeymoon. Not anymore. Call him. Tell him to get back here immediately, or Hayes Development Group will be a very different company when he returns. Dad started to protest, but something in my voice must have convinced him this wasn't a request. I'll make the calls. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. I organized my evidence into neat folders, each one labeled and cross-referenced: bank statements, email printouts, contract analyses, a complete paper trail of their betrayal, assembled like a prosecutor's case file. At exactly 2 o'clock, Dad and Ethan walked into my office. Ethan looked terrible, sunburned and rumpled, his Hawaiian shirt wrinkled from what must have been a frantic flight home. Dad just looked scared. "Whoa, what's this about?" Ethan demanded. "Lauren is furious that I had to cut our honeymoon short for some family emergency." I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. "Sit down, both of you." "Caroline," Dad said gently, "you're scaring me." What's wrong? I opened the first folder and placed a bank statement in front of them, then another, then another. Well, what's wrong is that my brother has been stealing from our company to fund his new father-in-law's business expansion. What's wrong is that you've both been planning to force me out of the company I built while lying to my face about family loyalty. Ethan's face went white. Dad stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. What's wrong? I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. Is that you seated me with the kitchen staff at your wedding while plotting to steal my life's work? Caroline, Ethan started. I'm not finished. I placed the termination letter on top of the pile. As of today, Hayes Development Group's exclusive partnership with Whitford Realty is terminated. $47 million in projects. Gone. Your new father-in-law's regional expansion. Dead in the water. Dad's face had gone gray. You can't do this. I already have. The termination notice was delivered this morning. Ethan shot to his feet. You're destroying everything! No, Ethan, I'm saving everything. From you. The explosion I'd been waiting for finally came, but it felt different than I'd expected. Smaller. Less important. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one cleaning up someone else's mess. I was making one of my own. And it felt magnificent. The boardroom had never felt smaller than it did at 4 o'clock that afternoon, with the entire Hayes Development leadership team crammed around the polished oak table I'd chosen myself 3 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to fight for my professional life in a room I'd designed to project power and success. Marcus Whitford sat at the far end like a conquering general, flanked by 2 lawyers I didn't recognize and Patricia Whitford, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Ethan fidgeted beside them, his honeymoon tan making him look like a guilty child playing dress-up in his father's boardroom. Dad occupied his usual chair at the head of the table, but his authority seemed diminished, fragile, like a shadow of the man who'd built this company. I'd positioned myself strategically across from Marcus, with Robert Kim on my right and Janet Morrison on my left. The rest of our senior staff filled the remaining seats, their faces carefully neutral, but their allegiances clear from their seating choices. Everyone who mattered was here for what would either be my vindication or my execution. Let's get one thing straight from the start. Marcus began without preamble. This termination notice is the product of a personal vendetta, not sound business judgment. Caroline Hayes is attempting to destroy a partnership worth nearly $50 million because she feels slighted by wedding seating arrangements. Is that your professional assessment? I asked, my voice level, that I'm risking my career over a dinner party. Well, what else would you call it? You've provided no credible business justification for this decision. I opened the folder in front of me and slid copies of the bank statements across the table. Here's my business justification. $3.7 million in unauthorized transfers from Hayes Development accounts to Whitford Realty subsidiaries, all bearing my brother's signature. The reaction was immediate. Janet Morrison sucked in a sharp breath. Robert Kim leaned forward to examine the documents. Even Patricia Whitford looked shocked, though whether at the revelation or the fact that I'd discovered it was unclear. Marcus barely glanced at the papers. Those are legitimate consulting fees. For what consulting? I interrupted. Show me the contracts. Show me the deliverables. Show me any documentation that justifies moving nearly $4 million to your shell companies. The documentation exists. Bullshit. I placed email printouts on top of the bank statements. These are communications between you and my brother, discussing capital transfers and Phase 2 implementation. This isn't consulting, Marcus. This is embezzlement. Ethan finally found his voice. Caroline, you're taking those emails out of context. Really, let me read this one aloud. I picked up the most damning exchange. Final question, are you certain your father will support the restructuring his health concerns make him unpredictable? I looked directly at Dad. Were you aware that your son and his new father-in-law were discussing your health as a factor in their business planning? Dad's face had gone from gray to white. Richard, what is she talking about? Marcus shot Ethan a look that could have melted steel. Richard, these are confidential business discussions taken completely out of context. And this one, I continued, ignoring his protests. My team has identified several areas where Hayes could benefit from Whitford's operational expertise. Tell me, Marcus, which areas our profit margins, which are the highest in the region, our client satisfaction ratings, which consistently rank in the top 5%, or maybe our operational efficiency, which you've been systematically undermining by siphoning off our working capital. The room fell silent except for the sound of papers rustling as the board members examined the evidence. Janet Morrison was the first to speak. Caroline, how long has this been going on? 6 months, possibly longer. The transfers accelerated after the engagement announcement. And the total amount? $3.7 million so far. But according to these emails, this was just phase 1. They were planning something much bigger after the wedding. Robert Kim cleared his throat. From a legal standpoint, these transfers appear to constitute a clear breach of fiduciary duty, if they were made without proper board authorization. They were authorized, Ethan said desperately. Dad knew about the strategic partnership. I knew about a partnership, Dad said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know about. He gestured helplessly at the papers scattered across the table. This. Marcus leaned forward, his composure finally cracking. Richard, we discussed the need for capital investments to support the expansion. Your son understood the strategic importance. My son understood you were offering him a way to look important while stealing my company. I cut in. The question is whether the rest of this board is going to let him get away with it. That's when the door burst open and Lauren Whitford stormed in, still wearing a sundress from her interrupted honeymoon. Her entrance was so dramatic it would have been comedic under different circumstances. Daddy, what is going on? Ethan said there was some kind of emergency. And now I find out this woman is trying to destroy our family's partnership over some ridiculous... Sit down, Lauren. Marcus's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. This is a board meeting. I don't care what kind of meeting it is. Caroline Hayes has lost her mind, and everyone knows it. She's been jealous of Ethan's success from day one, and now she's trying to sabotage his marriage and his business prospects because she can't handle being left behind. Enough! The word came out of my mouth like a gunshot, silencing the room instantly. I stood up slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle around me. You want to know what I can't handle? Lauren, I can't handle watching my life's work be stolen by people who think I'm too weak to fight back. I can't handle being treated like hired help at my own brother's wedding while you and your family plot to rob my company blind. I placed both hands on the table and leaned forward, looking directly at Marcus. But most of all, I can't handle the arrogance of people who think they can take everything I've built and offer me consulting scraps in return. Marcus straightened in his chair, his mask of civility finally completely gone. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Caroline, Whitford Realty has resources you can't imagine. Legal teams, political connections, business relationships that span decades. If you think you can destroy us with some accounting irregularities and hurt feelings. I don't think I can destroy you, Marcus. I smiled, and it felt like ice forming in my veins. I know I already have. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Lauren stopped talking, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the room's dynamic. The termination notice I sent this morning doesn't just cancel our partnership, I continued. It activates the penalty clauses for breach of contract. Whitford Realty owes Hayes Development Group $12 million in liquidated damages, payable within 30 days. Marcus's face went white. You can't? I can, and I will. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to explain to your board of directors how you managed to lose $47 million in committed projects while owing another $12 million in penalties. The transformation in the room was like watching dominoes fall. Dad straightened in his chair as understanding dawned. Robert Kim nodded approvingly at the legal maneuvering. Janet Morrison and the other senior staff began to look at me with something approaching awe. And Marcus Whitford, for the first time since I'd known him, Looked like a man who'd finally realized he was drowning. Now then," I said, settling back into my chair. "Let's discuss the terms of your surrender." The negotiations took exactly 47 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the boardroom wall tick past each second while Marcus Whitford's empire crumbled in real time. By 5:15 p.m., the terms were agreed upon and documented. Whitford Realty would return the full $3.7 million to Hayes Development within 72 hours. They would pay an additional $2 million in penalty fees for breach of contract. Most importantly, they would transfer their stakes in 3 regional development projects back to Hayes Development at cost projects they'd planned to use as the foundation of their Midwest expansion. Marcus signed the settlement agreement with the resigned efficiency of a man who knew he was beaten. His lawyers had advised him to fight, but the math was simple litigation would cost more than surrender, and the evidence against him was bulletproof. Lauren sat in stunned silence throughout the entire negotiation, her fairy tale wedding slowly transforming into a financial nightmare. When Marcus finally stood to leave, she followed him like a lost child, her designer sundress wilted with defeat. Ethan tried to speak to me as the room emptied, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Not today, Ethan. Maybe not ever, but definitely not today." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression changed his mind. He left without another word, following his wife and her family toward whatever remained of their dreams. Dad was the last to go. He lingered by the door, looking older than his 68 years, but somehow more solid than he'd seemed in months. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "I should have said that more often." "You should have trusted me more often." He nodded, accepting the criticism. "The company is yours now, Caroline. Officially, I'll have Robert draw up the paperwork this week." I started to protest that the board still needed to vote. There were procedures to follow, but he waved me off. "The board will vote however you tell them to vote. You've earned that right." He paused at the door. Just try to forgive an old man for being scared of change. After he left, I sat alone in the boardroom as the sun set over the city I'd spent 20 years learning to navigate. The silence was different now, not empty, but expectant, like the building itself was waiting to see what I'd do with the power I'd just claimed. By Wednesday, the story had spread through the industry like wildfire. The business journals called it the Hayes Development Coup, while the society pages focused on the wedding revenge scandal. I ignored them all, too busy restructuring the company to care about public opinion. David Brennan's contracts were signed by Thursday. 2 other partnerships followed by the end of the week. Within a month, Hayes Development Group had more committed revenue than ever before in its history, and none of it depended on family connections or social status. The senior staff rallied around the changes with an enthusiasm I hadn't expected. Janet Morrison took over as COO, implementing operational improvements she'd been suggesting for years. Robert Kim restructured our legal department to prevent future embezzlement. Even our field crews worked with renewed energy, proud to be part of a company that valued competence over nepotism. Ethan returned from his abbreviated honeymoon to find his desk cleared out and his access codes deactivated. I offered him a generous severance package and a letter of recommendation, but no position in the company. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Lauren filed for divorce 3 months later. Apparently, discovering that your new husband is a thief and your father is facing federal fraud charges tends to dampen romantic feelings. She moved back to Connecticut to live with relatives, leaving Ethan to face the consequences of his choices alone. Marcus Whitford's legal troubles were just beginning when I stopped following the story. Federal investigators had taken an interest in his business practices, and several other partners had come forward with similar tales of financial manipulation. I testified when required, but mostly I focused on building something better than what I'd inherited. 1 year later, Hayes Development Group was thriving beyond my wildest projections. We'd expanded into 2 new markets, hired 50 additional employees, and established a reputation for integrity that opened doors I'd never imagined possible. The company my father built and I'd rebuilt was finally, truly mine. Sometimes, late at night in my office, I think about that wedding day, about sitting in the kitchen with the catering staff while my family celebrated without me, about the humiliation that burned so bright it transformed into something harder and more useful than anger. They thought they could break me with shame and exclusion. Instead, they forged me into something stronger than they ever expected, something they couldn't control, couldn't manipulate, couldn't discard when convenient. They wanted me to disappear quietly into the background of their success story. Instead, I wrote my own story, one where the woman they underestimated becomes the only one left standing when the smoke clears. And you know what? That story turned out to be worth every moment of pain it cost me to write. Sir, thank you so much for listening to Caroline's journey of transformation and triumph. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from around the world. Are you Team Caroline, or do you think she went too far? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about family loyalty versus standing up for yourself. Your stories and perspectives make this community amazing.